When I was a child, we spent a lot of weekends driving into the mountains of West Virginia to go see my grandmother, and I loved staying in her house. She lived in an old house that had been converted into an upstairs and a downstairs apartment. She lived in the lower story. I thought her apartment had all the perks. She had use of the extra deep front porch where I loved to play. She never had to carry her groceries up the back staircase, and I loved that she had the fireplace. My favorite cuckoo clock always sat there on her mantel. So as far as I could tell, the only disadvantage of living downstairs was sometimes hearing the noises that came from upstairs. We, of course, would always hear the wooden floors as they creaked beneath footsteps. The old pipes gave away every turn of a faucet. And I, really didn't know that much about the woman who lived up there. I'd see her come and go and hear the noises. And when the floors would creak, I always wondered who she was and what she did up there. Now I realize that you and I live in something like my grandmother's lower story apartment. We comprehend only a little of what's happening in the upper story of life. Most of what we know about the occupant of the upstairs apartment comes from periodic glimpses as he goes up and down the back staircase. We hear the sounds of his footsteps or the rearranging of furniture, and they give us hints of his presence. On rare occasions, his voice is loud enough that we can make out the intonations. And while we play on the porch and warm ourselves by the fire and live life, in the lower story, a divine author sits at his desk in the upstairs apartment, pen in hand, and he writes. He writes your story and my story, much like he wrote the stories in the pages of Scripture, the stories of Abraham and Moses and David. He writes our stories with immortal ink, and his eyes are always fixed out the windows on eternity. As he writes our stories, they are not unlike the stories of the people who we read about in the pages of Scripture. Let me read what Romans 15:4 says to you about the stories in Scripture. It says, "For everything that was written in the past was written to teach us." It was written for our learning, so let's learn. In this study, we're going to begin on the first page of Scripture and journey chronologically all the way to the last page of Scripture. We won't study every word or every story, but we will pick up on the major redemptive themes from beginning to end. And as we study this great story of Scripture, we will see how we can live a better story right now. So thanks for joining me. I can't wait to begin.